Yeah. Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome you to our third office hours, our live chat presented by TopResume. TopResume is the largest resume writing service in the world, and you can request a free critique at any time by visiting topresume.com. My name is Amanda Augustine, and I will be your host today. So for the next 60 minutes, we're going to be chatting it up. Today's focus is going to be on changing careers. But before I get into that, I'm going to give you a little information on me. If we haven't been introduced before, my name is Amanda Augustine. I am a certified professional career coach and resume writer, and I've been in the job search space for nearly 15 years. As I mentioned, today's live chat for office hours is all about changing careers. And I don't know how many of you know it, but today is actually official Evaluate Your Life Day. So my team and I thought this topic was pretty fitting. I thought I'd start by sharing some job goal exercises to help you narrow down those goals and make sure you know what you want to do next. And then once we've got a better understanding of where you want to go, how in the world do you get there? I will share tips and resources along the way, and of course we'll open it up to Q&A, although the focus is definitely on changing careers, making that career move. You know, any question within reason is fair game, so keep that in mind. I'm also very excited to share a few announcements with you today that we haven't necessarily broadcast anywhere before. So why don't I start with those before we jump into all the career changing stuff. First off, we're really excited to be launching a new site called topinterview.com, and you can go there and be paired with one of our interview coaches who will actually help coach you through the interview process, and you'll be doing it through video, something definitely worth checking out. But in honor of launching this new site, we also excitingly decided that we were going to launch a contest. And so we have something called the VIP Job Search Sweepstakes. It starts this moment. It's going to go till, I'm going to look at my notes now so I don't mess this up. It's going until November 12th. And if you enter to win, you will get the VIP treatment for your job search. You will win a free resume makeover, cover letter makeover, LinkedIn profile makeover, plus a 45-minute interview coaching session with one of our top interview coaches. In order to enter to win, I'm going to ask our ladies if they will also click or supply the link. It should be below, but it's on topresume.com/VIP job search sweepstakes. That's a mouthful. So instead, how about you just click the link below? All right. For those who just joined, I'd also love to know where everyone's at, and if you could just shout out and say hi, because I'd love to see what's going on and where everyone's at. If you already know what you're trying to get to, what that job goal is, please share it. We'd love to see what everyone's doing. What I think is so interesting about today's job market versus say that of 10, 15, 20 years ago is that you're not expected to get a job, work at it for 20-something years, and retire with a pension and a gold watch. That's, I think of that as my parents' era or my grandparents' era, but not necessarily myself and those who are in the workforce today. What's nice is that you can have a lot of different chapters to your career. I was looking up some stats, and in today's workforce, the average professional will switch jobs anywhere from 10 to 15 times. That's a lot. Think about that. The average professional is going to change jobs 10 to 15 times. I think some people will probably find that terrifying. I think others are going to say, oh, you know what? I'm not alone. I feel stuck. I don't like what I'm doing. Guess what? Most people don't seem to stay in one role or even one career path for their entire careers anymore. So I think it's really important to remember that you may want to do 7 different things. You can do those, but I think you need to be strategic about how you go about them. Does that make sense? I promise, guys, I only had 1 cup of coffee today. I'm just on a hyper roll. So we're gonna keep going. For anyone who just joined us, my name is Amanda Augustine, and we're here talking about career changes. This live chat is presented by TopResume, the largest resume writing service in the world. You can check out TopResume to request a free resume review. And also, if you check out the link below, you can also sign up to win our VIP job search makeover. So definitely sign up, no purchase required, and it closes on November 12th. All right, moving along. The first thing I wanted to go through was share a few exercises that you can do if you're interested in finding a new job, but you're really not too sure what you want to do or how you want to get there. This works if you are trying to make a radical change or if you're just trying to make a slight change. So what I'm going to do is walk you through 3 exercises. There are a ton more. I've provided my colleagues with links to a lot more exercises in addition to the details on the ones I'm going to explain now, so that I'm not going to sit here and pause and say do all these exercises, but I'd like you to get an idea of what you can do and then choose the ones that make sense to you, that appeal to you given your circumstance, and use that information to further clarify your goals. So we'll talk about that. And then after we go through those exercises, I'm going to switch gears and say, okay, let's assume you figured out exactly what you want to do. Now let's talk about what are the different things you need to think about as you're making that transition. And this also applies if you're in the military and transitioning out to civilian work. This applies if you've worked for a lot of years at this point and you've just decided kind of towards the end of your career that you want to make a change. What does that look like? So we can definitely go a number of different directions with the questions, and I look forward to answering your questions. All right, so 3 exercises I promised I'd go through. These are my 3 favorite, but there's a ton of different ways that you can go about this. The first one is called 9 lives. I also refer to it in some articles as being a cat or being cat-like or something, or thinking like a cat, something along those lines. But here's the idea behind it. Imagine that you have 9 lives. In each of those lives, you must work. You're not going to marry rich, win the lottery. You're not going to suddenly, receive a ton of money in somebody's will. Every job has equal respect, equal clout, so to speak. However much money you need to make to be happy, you're making it. Whatever skill set you need to do that job, you have it. So if you were going to have 9 lives and you have the skill set that you need to do it and you're making the amount of money that you want to make and every job is of equal level of respect, what would those 9 jobs be? And this is one of those exercises that's obviously a bit more on the creative side, but I love doing this. I've done this exercise multiple times in the past. I love doing this with clients, but think about it. If you make a list of those 9 lives, the reason that we put in all those rules at the beginning is because it removes all the buts. I would love to pursue this, but it doesn't make enough money. But I don't have the education that's required. But I can't be a prima ballerina. It's not going to happen anymore. That doesn't matter. In this list, we just want to get those 9 lives. And oftentimes what you'll find is that your childhood dreams come into this. So what did you want to be when you grew up? Suddenly some of that stuff starts, surfacing, and I think that's really interesting. So make that list. That's one. I'll talk about what to do with that list later because we're going to go over 2 other exercises, and while they all get a different piece of information, you're going to do the same thing with all of it. So first exercise, 9 lives. Second exercise is called Billboard Top Hits. Think back over your career, your professional life, your personal life, your time spent in college or wherever you studied. It could be the volunteer work you've done. But I want you to think back over the course of your entire life, professional and personal life, and say, okay, what am I most proud of? What are the things I've done in my life that, I really get excited to share with people? And I would say try not to make them all something outside of work, but there could be a healthy mix. But think about what are the projects you've worked on or the things you've achieved. It could be very small, but as long as it's important to you, that's what matters. So what are those top 5 to 10 proudest moments for you? And you may quickly boil it down, and there may only be 3 to 5 at the end of the day that you're truly proud of. That's okay. I would just say you want a few. You don't want just one. So think about what are those proudest moments. If you're earlier in your career, you may have less. That's okay. But what about those? What motivated you? How did you get into that in the first place? Did you raise your hand, or did somebody tap you on the shoulder and bring you into this project or this situation? What was the focus of the work? What skills were you using? Was it a collaborative environment, or were you working independently? Were you leading the group, or were you amongst a bunch of people? What was the environment like around you? What were the core values driving whatever you were doing? Think about every aspect of those top 3 to 5 moments. That's why I call them the Billboard top hits. And just write down everything you can think of about those situations, particularly why it made you so happy, what were you proud of? And this really helps get at that question where I always say, what are you great at? What are you passionate about? What are you not so great at? What are you not so passionate about? Because you can be great at a lot of things, but it's only important if you actually also are passionate about those things. You can be great at a lot of things, doesn't mean you want to do them for a job. So we're trying to find that sweet spot, and that's why this Billboard Top Hits exercise works really well. So that's exercise number 2. The third and final exercise that I'm going to go over is called the nitty-gritty details. And you can either take out a piece of paper and write this down, or you can grab a copy of your resume. But I like to look at what's every role you've held. It can be volunteer positions, it can be internships, it can be paid, non-paid work, short-term, permanent, full-time, part-time. You get the idea. Make a list of everything you've done. And then put 2 columns next to that. In one column, you're going to write in nitty-gritty detail, what did you enjoy about that role? Specifically, everything about that job. It could be, I liked the company, I liked my boss, I really enjoyed the work I was doing, I liked commuting to the city, or I liked working from home, I liked not having a boss. Whatever it is, really think about what were the good things about that job. And I get it, some jobs, that side's gonna be really slim, and that's okay. In the next column, in nitty-gritty detail, what did you not like about that job? And I think you know what I'm getting at here. Really think about, well, what turned you off about that role? It could be the boss, the pay, the work environment, the actual work you were doing. You didn't feel you were being properly compensated. Whatever it is, really put all those details in. With all of these exercises, whichever ones you choose to do, whether you choose to do 1, 2, or all 3, or some of the others that I have proposed on the site that my colleagues will share with you below, take a step back and then say, okay, what are the themes I'm seeing? With the first exercise, with 9 lives, it's talking about, okay, well, do I see that the jobs that I really find interesting either have a theme of a love of nature, working with animals, being super creative, getting to use my hands, being in a corporate environment, or maybe it's being as far from a corporate environment as possible. You may find that every role you've chosen, you look at and you go, hey, all of these are independent. I wouldn't work in a corporation, or I wouldn't work under a boss, and that's okay too. But what you're looking for are those themes, because those are really important and will help you clarify those job goals. When I look at the Billboard Top Hits and we're talking about what are all the great things about each one of these accomplishments, you're looking again for themes. That's the name of the game. Okay, well, did I always tend to take charge and lead? Was it always leveraging a certain skill set of mine that I didn't realize, but it's something I really love. And if I could, the majority of my job would be based around that if I could make enough money doing it. Think about those things. Sometimes this is when the aha moment comes up and you're like, God, the stuff I really loved, it has to do with the stuff I'm doing outside of work. And that's a big, flag or something to note. And the same thing with the nitty-gritty exercise. You're looking for those themes. If in every job you hated your boss, maybe that's a sign you want to be an entrepreneur and work on your own or be a freelancer. Perhaps every time you got into a very corporate environment, you didn't like it. Or perhaps every time you were in a startup environment, you loved it. But look for those themes. And with all of these exercises, at the end of the day, there's 3 things you're trying to figure out. You're looking to see what are the core values that tend to guide my work and make me happiest? What's the skill set I'm putting forth? What are the skills that I'm using that I'm good at, soft and hard skills, that I tend to thrive when that's what I have to depend on to do my job? And then what's the perfect work environment for me? And those can be so different. Do you like a large corporation or do you like the startup feel? Do you like the idea of a very flexible work environment where you're not necessarily going to an office every day? Or do you really like being in a very collaborative environment? These are all different ways that you can approach a work environment, and this does start to talk about that corporate culture aspect of finding a job, which is so incredibly important. So the idea is you want to take those 3 things and use that to say, all right, what are the potential career paths that make sense? What I like to do is when I'm looking at that list, I say, okay, these are the skills that I'm really great at and I enjoy using, and these seem to be the themes in terms of industry or field or something along those lines where I tend to gravitate towards. So it could be that I tend to gravitate towards the arts, but I can't draw to save my soul. However, whenever I get to crunch numbers and play in Excel sheets with pivot tables, I'm a happy camper. Not everybody, that's quite a random mix, I'll give you that. But how could you marry those 2 together? Is there the number crunching job in a company or in an industry that I would enjoy being around? And I think that's the important thing. So you may not want to go back to school and become a doctor, even though that's something you're very drawn to medicine. But you could leverage your sales and marketing experience and maybe work for a pharma company or a biotech company. So I think it's looking for those opportunities where you can leverage your skills. If you're someone who's already said, I know I'm really interested, I want to move into this field, or I want to move into this industry and I have no idea how. I don't know how my skill set fits into that world. What I want you to write down is this concept of informational interviews. And I'm going to ask my colleague in a moment or two if she could share with you guys a link on informational interviews. This is one of my favorite techniques when anybody's looking to make a career change. This works really well if you just graduated school and you don't know what you want to do with your life, or you got that entry-level job because you needed the paycheck and you're like, I don't want to do this. It could be when you're halfway through your career and suddenly your priorities have shifted. I think we don't recognize that a lot. That as your life changes and as your career progresses and as you get older, what you wanted when you were 25 may not be what you want when you're 35 or 45. And you have to recognize that and say that's okay. And then reprioritize what type of role you're going after and what does that mean for your job search moving forward. So informational interviews. One of the most highly underrated techniques and one of my absolute favorite ones, definitely something to try. The idea is that you, the job seeker or the professional considering a career change, you're going to be interviewing people. They talk about it in the parachute book that everyone's obsessed with. But the idea is that, okay, you're going to do some reconnaissance. You're going to look at your network, either run some advanced searches on your LinkedIn profile, make a list and kind of inventory who the social butterflies are of your group of friends or even professionals. They're also called power connectors. And identify who's out there that can connect you to somebody who works at the company, in the field, or in the industry that really interests you, and reach out and ask, I'm very interested, I'm considering changing careers, but I'm not really sure how to go about it. Do you have 5-10 minutes? Do you have time for a cup of coffee? I'd love to take you out and just learn a little bit more about your experience and what's going on in your industry. You got to time it appropriately. I mean, we all know that. If you know the person already, that always helps. If you can be introduced to the person by a mutual connection, that always helps. What I also recommend is consider leveraging the networks you're already a part of. A lot of people, if you graduated from college, there's probably an alumni group somewhere. You can go on LinkedIn and see who graduated from the same school as you and is now working in the field that you're interested in or holds a title that's really interesting to you. There's a really cool site that I forgot to mention to my colleagues, but it's called Alumni Fire. Alumni Fire is a really cool group, and it's basically alums helping alums. That's the whole point behind it. You have to get a certain threshold of people from your alma mater to join, but once you hit that threshold, the idea is anybody who's on that site says, I am willing to give some sort of help, whether it's be a mentor, give advice, share jobs that are open in my company, whatever it is, it's a great place to also look for people. So anytime that there's a mutual connection, a mutual interest, you both worked at the same company in the past, whatever it is, that's a great opportunity. I actually have a blurb that I wrote out that I'm hoping we can share in the comments. It's called Networking Mad Libs. And this is a great way. You can use this either as a talking point or even if you're sending an email, you're sending an email on LinkedIn, but you can go in, and I'm going to read this because it is a little long. But basically the gist of it says, at this point in my career, I'm looking for new opportunities in X industry. I am targeting companies where I can apply my relevant experience in X area as well as my transferable skills. I'm turning to you to seek career advice. I've started to put my resume out there and would love your feedback on the different avenues to success. So the whole idea is like, hey, can we grab a beverage and talk about how you became successful over there? That's one approach. If you're not that far in, you're not too sure where your skill set fits, I would go with these informational interviews, go in there, and what you want to learn is how did they get to where they are? What organizations are they a part of? What publications are they reading religiously? What newsletters are they signed up for? Where should you be going to start learning the language and the lingo, the terminology of an industry that interests you? And also, find out from them, where would your skill set fit? So you have to be prepared to talk about, this is what I've done in my career. I've realized that these are the skill sets that I enjoy most. These are the things I love to do most and I'm best at. I'm not too sure where that would apply or how that could apply to your industry. Use them as that person to help you figure out what's the right role for you to be going after. Informational interviews are also really great because if you have someone who's really invested in helping you, they'll also help identify where the skill gaps lie. Because oftentimes you're not a perfect fit from the get-go to go from one job to another. There might be some steps in between or some skills you're going to need to bolster in order to be an attractive candidate, and they can help you figure out what those are. And there are a ton of places where you can go to find courses or conventions or any of those things where you can bolster that skill set. But I'll get into that a little bit later. I think by far, this is one of the first things you have to do, because once you have a better understanding of what's the right role to go after and what you might have to do behind the scenes to bolster your skill set so that you are a more attractive candidate, then it's time to start addressing all your personal branding materials. That means your resume, your LinkedIn profile, it's refining your elevator pitch, which I hate that term, but this idea of what's your personal branding statement? How are you branding yourself to others when you're talking about your abilities? Something I should note is that, of course, transferable skills, there's always a set that we know are universal and can be transferred. That's the idea of the skill can apply wherever you go, right? So it could be your communication skills, written as well as verbal. It could be the softer skills, management, leadership, creativity, negotiation. The list goes on and on and on. We have a ton of articles on our site that talk about transferable skills. If you go to topresume.com, click on career advice, you can search for transferable skills. Guaranteed you'll find a few articles about that. For anyone who just joined us, my name's Amanda Augustine, and this is Office Hours presented by TopResume, the largest resume writing service in the world. And you can request a free resume critique at any time by going to topresume.com. We are also currently running a contest. It's our VIP job search sweepstakes. If you would like to give your job search the VIP treatment and get a free resume makeover, LinkedIn makeover, cover letter makeover, as well as a 45-minute coaching session on interviewing with one of our top interview coaches, you can register today. I'm going to ask if my team could just share that link again or make sure it's available because it's a little long and I'm sure I will flub it if I try and repeat it again. So moving on, we talked a bit about networking because I think there is that initial networking component that I really consider part of the prep process because it's more to help you clarify your goals once you have a better sense of what skills you want to use and what industries interest you. And then you got to figure out what's the logical next step in terms of what's the job you need to go after now. One thing I always like to tell people is that, okay, you may want to get, you may want to get to VP of marketing and currently you are a sales rep. Obviously, you cannot jump from sales rep to VP of marketing overnight or even to marketing manager overnight. That might be a stretch depending on what you do for a living. What I would say is the easiest transitions to make are where parts of your previous experience become very valuable selling points in your new target. So for instance, if I was going to go from a sales rep and I wanted to go into event marketing or PR, whatever it is, I would want to target companies that are going after the same industry that I was in, so I can really market the fact that I know this industry inside or out. Or I'd want to go after organizations or industries where they're targeting the same customer that I know very well. For instance, I was once coaching a client who had gone to school and actually was amazing in languages, but really had been bartending and was a waiter for 10 years out of school. He was very good at it, but he really wanted to get into sales. That's what he was after. And so when we thought about it, we're like, all right, well, restaurant supply companies, food companies, anything. We were even looking at places like Plated, and stuff like that, because anywhere where understanding restaurant owners or understanding consumers that are frequent, eater-outers, not a real word. Whenever you can understand that target audience and you can position yourself as being a subject matter expert in that area or very knowledgeable, that's a great selling point. And I think sometimes people forget or underestimate the amount of information they know. Even in a role where they weren't that excited about it, you may not be jazzed about a role, but you may have learned a whole lot about that industry or about that target audience in the process. Is there any way to take that knowledge and leverage it towards a role that's much more appealing in a company that's much more interesting to you? Going back to the idea that there could be steps along the way, just always think that, yeah, you're not going to be VP of marketing overnight, but what's the next immediate step in order to get there? One thing I like to do is go onto LinkedIn and or any industry directory and try and get a sense of people who hold the role I want today. What did their background look like, and what were some of the roles they held on their way to getting there? Because that will give you clues as to what types of roles you need to shoot for in order to make the progression and ultimately get to where you want to be. A lot of information that I'm throwing out there. The one other thing I put out there is that if you're not too sure where you can go, and I know I gave you all these exercises, and you may say you want to go into a certain industry, but you're not too sure how to get there. The other trick that I really like is to go on LinkedIn, run an advanced search for people who previously worked at the same company you currently work for or one of its competitors and held a similar role to something you held. More about the function than anything else, tech versus sales versus marketing versus finance. Look for those people and find the people who have actually made some sort of transition and they're no longer in that industry or they're no longer in that field. those are gold mines in terms of networking. Those are the people you want to reach out to. You're hoping you have a friend of a friend, or you're somehow connected, because those are the people who, A, they left your company, so it's okay to talk to them. B, if they made that transition, you can look and see where in the world did they go, because that will give you an indication of what industries or types of companies value the type of experience that you bring to the table based on where you've worked. There are some you just don't realize or understand. For instance, a lot of job boards often hire people who worked for dating sites, because you're matching two groups together. It's often a subscription-based business. Oftentimes, you hire a lot of your marketers from dating sites, because they understand how a job board or a job search site will work. I don't know if everybody would say, oh yeah, that makes sense, but most people, I don't know if they realize that parallel, and it wouldn't have occurred to them that that's an industry they could check out. So if they were trying to move to a very different type of company, that might be a great way to start that transition. So I always think sometimes there's a few transitional roles in between. I'm going to talk a little bit about resumes and then open it up to Q&A. Does that sound about right? We're about halfway through at this point. Anybody who's just joining, again, my name is Amanda Augustine. I'm the career advice expert for TopResume, the largest resume writing service in the world, and we are here talking about making a career change, and what does that take? What does that take? It takes patience. It takes patience, and it takes a lot of legwork. I'm going to just throw that out there, because we already know that the job search takes longer than anybody really wants it to take, right? Back in the day, pre-bust, pre-bubble bust, it was, I want to say, under 60 days was the average time it took to find a job, somewhere around 2 to 3 months. Post-bust, it was taking about 6 months on average. And a few years ago, it was up to 8 to 10 months. It's actually gotten better. It's gone down a bit more, which is really good for job seekers, that there is a war for talent. And in some industries, that's never changed. But something to keep in mind is that it's always easier to find a job when you're currently employed, fair or not, it's the reality, and when you're trying to make a very natural progression. So when you're trying to make a radical change, it's always going to be a bit more challenging. We're going to talk about different things you can do to your resume and how to play up different features, but I will say networking is going to become a very, very key component of your job search strategy, because oftentimes that resume is not going to make it past those initial screeners, because you don't have the perfect progression of experience that they're looking for. And so oftentimes you're going to need to pass that perfect resume onto, or that perfectly formatted resume onto your networking connections, so that it bypasses some of those initial gatekeepers and someone's advocating for you to move into that role. Something else I would put out there in terms of job search strategy, if you're trying to move functions and not necessarily industries, so for instance, before when I said, trying to move from marketing to sales, or sales to marketing, or, finance to HR, or HR to marketing, whatever it is, it's usually easier to make a more radical change if you can do it within your existing company. So if you work for a company that's either small enough that everyone has to wear multiple hats, and you can, elbow your way into, or volunteer your way into helping other departments and gaining some relevant experience and moving into that function within your existing company, that's always easier than trying to make the change to a completely different company, and a completely different industry. Or field. Something else I put out there is that, again, the more things you're trying to change, the more challenging it is. So I would definitely, if you want to relocate, change industries, change functions, you want to basically clean slate, change everything, I'd probably take a step back and say, what's most important of all of those variables? Really think about what's most important, what's priority for you, because you may have to do it in some stages. Again, there might be a few opportunities along the way to get you to your ultimate goal. And that's okay, as long as you're striving and everything you're doing is leading you closer to your long-term goal. Make sense? All right. Resume. Let's talk about what do you do with this resume now that you have a good sense of what you want to change and how you want to change it. There's an article that we don't necessarily need to share at the moment, but I'd like to share at the end of these tips about resume writing that will give you a really nice sample of when you're looking to make a career change, what's a model resume to look at to help you make those changes. So first of all, your resume may get shorter. Even if you have 15 plus years of experience, there's a good chance your resume is going to get a bit shorter because you're going to reevaluate every role you've held and you're going to rewrite what you have about it. In most jobs, you've done a lot of stuff, right? A lot of different things. And this is particularly for those who are farther along in their careers. You may have done a lot of things. We only want to focus on what's most relevant to the role you're going after today. So if you held a role where, say, you had your hands in a lot of different cookie jars or you were wearing a bunch of different hats, you will probably only focus on the information that demonstrates the skill set or the industry knowledge or whatever other selling points are marketable given your new goal. I like to give the example of somebody who was in recruiting who now wants to go into sales, right? The most natural progression that you could make would probably be going into selling some sort of software that you'd sell to companies that's particularly around recruitment or HR, managing, their people, something like that. But you want to look back and say, okay, what about my experience relied on sales skills? And you'd be surprised. And this is where those informational interviews, these conversations that you have with people in the field that you're interested in can be really helpful because they can help translate your existing experience into terms that the employer you want to target will truly understand. So that's a big part of it. Take your resume, we're going to rip it apart. We're going to go after each individual role and say, what about that role? Did I use skills that are important or considered desirable in the role I want to go to? Even how you describe the companies. This is often when I like to put a one-liner underneath the company name. Not always necessary, but sometimes helpful. So if the companies you worked for are in the same industry you're targeting, or they're the same size you're targeting, or they worked in the same geographic area, you want to play up whatever details are going to be most relevant given the types of companies and opportunities you're targeting now. You're also going to kind of reevaluate what are the different things you did and say, okay, what's worth highlighting that I may have not highlighted before? This is the same thing with your network, right? You're going to reevaluate your network and reprioritize based on your new goals, who you're going to reach out to first. The other thing about your resume is you want to start looking at sample jobs once you have a better sense of what's the type of role you're going after and identify, okay, what are the terms that are routinely popping up on these job listings? What skill sets are they asking for? What tools are they asking you to have knowledge in or experience in? And I'd look at that and say, okay, which ones do I have? I may be wording it very differently. It might be time to switch to that language because I want to translate my experience into terms my new employer will understand. And then also, if there are some skills on there that you're seeing and they're routinely popping up, that's a big red flag that you need to work on building up those skills. Whether it's through online courses, a local college, going to a seminar, going to a trade show and getting credits. Whatever it may be, there's a lot of different ways to go about it. That's something to consider. The last thing I'd throw out there is look into skill-based volunteering. And I have a number of different sources that you can use in order to find skill-based volunteering. They include Catch-a-Fire, Taproot, I want to say Pilot Light Pilot, something along those lines. Let me look, I'm gonna cheat now, guys. Points of Flight, not even close. Not even close. And then there's one called the Corporation for National and Community Service. So I think there's about 3 or 4 of them out there. These are all opportunities where you can do skill-based volunteering while you have your current job if you're trying to gain some skill sets or experience that's very relevant to what you're trying to do. These websites can be really helpful. You can basically say, I'm looking to volunteer my time to use this skill set, whether it's marketing or finance or whatever it is. Use that as an opportunity to help get some more experience in that area. Everybody wins. And the nice part about it is that that's something you can include on your resume. You do not have to get paid for a role in order to put it on your resume, whether it's an internship, it's a fellowship, it's a volunteer role, or perhaps it's a role that you raise your hand for an organization you're a part of. So if you became, I had a client who was in marketing, still in marketing, loves it. Her role did not allow her to do a lot of social media, and she really wanted to build that skill set so that in her next role she could work in an organization where managing over social media strategy would be a part of it, right? She had gotten a social media certificate online, but she was also in a local chapter for a marketing association that's well known. She raised her hand and she started managing over all their social media channels for their chapter. And that we put at the top of her resume so that you could say, oh look, she holds this marketing manager role, but she's also on the side gaining this relevant experience. So yeah, she can put it all together and take on a role that allows her to leverage all those skill sets. So that's one way that you can start bolstering your resume. If you don't necessarily have all the skills you need, look for those opportunities where you can get them. Same thing has to do with freelance work. If you already have, dipped your toe in a certain skill set, but you're not getting to use it in your current job, if it's a strong enough skill set, look for work on freelance sites. I did not, unfortunately, compile a list of those ahead of time, but it's very easy. You can just Google, freelance work, freelance sites, and there's a ton of them out there. But there are a lot of opportunities where you can start taking on some contract work and you can label yourself as a consultant or a freelancer in that area, and that can float to the top of your resume. And so that's the first thing recruiters are seeing when they're looking at your resume. It positions you better for this type of opportunity. Since we're almost at about that 15-minute mark to the end, I'd love to open it up to questions. Do we have any, Jenna?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Sean asks, when changing careers, how do you feel about getting over the hurdle of not having the right background/experience for this role?
Okay, great question, Sean. So the idea is, how do you get over that hurdle of not having that perfect background and story? I will say here at Top Resume, we believe that everybody has a story to tell, and we're here to help them help you tell the best version of that story, right? And so I think a large part of that does have to do with storytelling. I feel like that's such a common and very popular theme right now, this idea of storytelling and marketing and all these other areas, and even in recruiting. But I think in job seeking, it's the same. The whole reason you have to have this 360-degree view of you as a professional on LinkedIn, on paper, on a resume, in person, is because everyone wants to hear a story these days. And what I'd really think about is, how can you tell that story? What about what you've done in the past has led you to want to do this type of role today? And what skills have you picked up along the way that have helped make you perhaps an unusual and not your classic fit for this role, but it gives you a different perspective. So I'd really look for those opportunities for how can you spin that story on its head and say, I tried these things out. This is what I learned about myself. This is what I learned I'm really great at and passionate about. That's why I'm pursuing this area. I think what makes me a really unique candidate for this type of role is that I come from this perspective. Or, perhaps I was a super fan and then I leverage my skill set and I'm trying to go into this role. I bring that side. I understand the consumer really well, or whatever it might be. I think that's the most important thing. The other thing I'll put out there is that you want to show that you're making strides to understand their industry and understand the role and what's involved in it. So you want to be aware of what are the skills or the natural roles they expected you to have, and how can you respond to that? How through mentoring, working with a mentor, or taking on an online course, or doing independent studies, or going to conferences and making connections, reading all the blogs, blogging about what you've learned. How can you demonstrate that you're being very proactive and learning what you can, and how can you articulate that when you're speaking to people at networking events, or if you get in front of a hiring manager? Because I think that's really important. Something else that just popped into my head when I was thinking about the answer to your question, and it floated right back out. Hold on. Oh, something you can do in order to demonstrate that you've been learning what's going on in the industry and that you're active this is where your social media activity can come into play. So whether you're trying to switch to a really creative role and maybe you've developed a really robust Instagram account or a blog or your own online portfolio, there's a lot of options out there now to do this for pretty low cost. To demonstrate, what you've been doing on the side, your more creative work. Or on LinkedIn, you now have the ability to basically, you could either write a status and share articles about the industry and share your point of view, or you can write out an entire article and publish it and share it with your network. There are ways that you can demonstrate what you've learned and the knowledge you're gaining, whether you're doing that for your 9-to-5 job or not. Does that help, Sean? Okay, great.
We have another question from Mark.
Okay.
So he's been a retail manager for over 18 years and just received his MBA.
Congratulations.
And now would like to make the change into the corporate world.
Okay.
He would like advice on how to make the change into corporate America.
Great question. So to sum up, retail management wants to go into corporate management, been doing retail management for quite a while. How do you make that transition? I would first start by saying if you have such a steady career in retail management, I don't know if that was at one company or multiple companies, but I would actually start by looking at the corporate sites for those organizations. As long as you have, always been in a good standing in those companies, even in the retail market, those are great ways to break into corporate, and it's a little bit more gradual because you already know something about that company. You may have worked in a different aspect of it, but you already have a really good understanding, and you know more than the average candidate coming from somewhere else. So I would start by hitting up their career sites. And if you're still working in retail management and you still have that job, oftentimes employees have access to insider, I'd say, career sites that the outside world is not allowed to see if the company's large enough. I'm thinking of like a Target, something like that. Most large chains tend to have a job board that's just for their employees who want to move within the organization. I would definitely start there. And then if those aren't panning out for you, what I would look at are competitors of those companies, because again, your industry experience is a really nice base, and that's considered a selling point. That's something you can market because you do understand that industry from a different perspective, but you have a lot of in-depth, you have 18 years of knowledge in that head of that industry. Or even if it's not that industry, it might be multiple industries, that's fine. What I would say is try and narrow your focus, because for anybody out there, if you're trying to make a career change and you're saying to yourself, well, I could do this, or I could do that, or I could do this, you have to build out a marketing plan for each job search. You cannot have 3 LinkedIn profiles. You can't have 3 different elevator pitches and 3 different resumes. It will be maddening. So I think you really have to maybe do your research and identify which is the most realistic opportunity for you or career path, which is the one you really want to throw all your chips in for, and pursue that one line. But I think that's the best way. Is start with what you know, work with the companies that you already have experience with, Mark, and start there. If it's more of a concern about being in a corporate environment, I think that's a spot where leverage the people at Career Services wherever you got your MBA. I don't know if it was online or if it was on campus, but whatever it is, they all tend to have some sort of services, and I would also rely on them. Take advantage of everything they're giving you for free. You've already spent a ton of money on an MBA. Make sure you're getting your money's worth. They also tend to help you find a job because they get evaluated on their placement rates. And so anybody who really wants help, if you go after it, you typically get it. So I definitely say rely on those groups because they'll definitely help you out. The other thing is make sure your MBA is front and center on your resume. Your first name, comma, MBA. In your professional summary, that first little part at the top of your resume, you should start by recent MBA graduate or recent graduate with a master's in blah, 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 and X years of experience in blank industries, looking to, leverage those skills in this type of role, to provide this type of results. That's where you want to go with that.
Let's see, Lem asks, In an interview, how do you explain to a new employer why you took time off between jobs to pursue personal goals?
Okay. So you have a gap in your resume, and now you have to explain it when you get in an interview room. Not a surprise. Couple things. If they don't ask you about it, don't bring it up. You got an interview, that means it must have not been a huge deal to them. So if there's anything that's on your resume that you're concerned is the big red flag, if they've brought you in for the interview and they're not talking about it, you don't really need to bring it up because it obviously doesn't seem to be an issue. That said, you should always be prepared with some sort of answer. So if you did something where it was you were taking care of a sick relative, or in your case, Lem, it was because you were pursuing some other type of personal goal, I think the biggest thing I do is, again, it's about spinning it, right? Acknowledging that there was the break if they're asking about it, but how can you talk about whatever that personal goal was? And again, I don't know what it is, but is there a way to spin it because you took a step back, realized the career path you were on was ultimately not the right path for you, so you took a little time off to figure out exactly what that is. During that time, you were also working on X, Y, and Z skill sets, or reading up on this, or whatever it is. Insert something. What have you been doing that's helping prepare you for whatever you want to do next? Try and find that one nugget. It could be, doing a lot of heavy research, or it could be really reevaluating and figuring out what's the right step for me. So now, interviewer, I am sitting here confidently in front of you because I know that this is the type of role that I'm looking for. This is the one I'm confident that I can do well, and it's because I have these skill sets and because I've actually taken the time to figure out exactly what type of company I want to be in, and I know it's your company. So it's just a spin. It's just a spin. Same thing happens for anybody who may have had a pretty long, steady career, and then they got really sick of their job, ran to a new job as opposed to ran away from their old job as opposed to running towards a new one. This is something I see a lot, that you hate your job so much that all you want to do is get out, and you don't really evaluate the next role you go to because you just want out of the old one, and that's all you're focused on. I can't tell you how many people I've seen do that, and then their next role, guaranteed 6 to 12 months they're there, max. And then they're out looking for a job again, and now they have to explain why they had this little blip. I'd recommend anybody who's really unhappy, figure out what you really want to do before you jump ship. It's always easier to find a job when you have a new job. But if you have that short blip where they're like, what happened? That was 6 months. If you have to have it on there because the way you work dates, it's just going to show a gap and you have to have that job on there. I would use it to say, I was trying something new. I was trying this type of role or this type of company, and this is what I learned about myself and what really works for me. And now that's why I'm confident that this role I'm applying for and this company that I'm applying to work for is the right type of opportunity for me. But then always bring it back to what are you bringing to them? Not only are you confident that you're a good fit, but it's because of this skill set and this experience, and this is how you know you can apply it to add value.
Awesome. Lem commented that you hit the nail on the head.
Oh, thanks, Lem.
We have a few other questions.
Yeah.
Suzanne asks, do you feel like you have to have an objective on your resume?
Oh, Suzanne, I love this question. Was this staged? I know it's not actually, but so I hate objective statements. I consider them to be a dirty word in the resume writing business, and I think most resume writers would agree with me, and I'll explain. I don't like objectives or objective resume statements, whatever you want to call it. I think they're dead because it's normally, I am looking for this type of role where I can leverage this skill set and add value to a company. It normally talks all about what you want. It normally has a lot of fluffy marketing stuff. Or it talks about your wants and needs. And I think we have to remember that although the resume feels very, very personal and we get very emotionally attached to certain parts of it because it's such a reflection of our lives and what we've been doing, it's a marketing document. If you were, I just went to a conference at the beginning of this week, JobVite. Shout out to JobVite. They did an awesome recruiter trade show in New York City. And their VP of marketing got up and he goes, recruiting is a funnel exercise, which basically means it's a sales exercise. You start with a bunch of leads and you're narrowing it down to the perfect candidate. Job seeking is a sales and marketing exercise. And so you got to remember that your resume is a marketing material and you're writing it for a target audience, and that's the employer that you want to work for. And so instead of having an objective statement, you want a professional or an executive summary. You want a few sentences that basically provide your elevator pitch. It's going to give information about you for sure. It's definitely going to somehow work in what you want and what you're looking for in a company, but it positions it in a way that's really talking more about how what you have to offer and what potential value that you can provide to your next employer. And so say, if recent MBA graduate with 10 years experience, managing teams, overseeing procurement, blah, 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 skilled negotiator with, doing X, Y, and Z. And then there's always some pieces that go on the end of a professional summary, depending on your circumstance, whether, willing to travel X% of the time, or if you speak multiple languages, you can always put bilingual or try whatever it is and put what the languages are, whatever those little pieces that people need to know. If some of your education was in a foreign country or your name is very exotic, what I would recommend doing is also putting, green card holder or US citizen. And the reason I do that, and I know that sounds awful, but it's because whether it's fair or not, some people assume that you may need a visa and they may not have the budget for it, and they will skip over you if they think that you require it. And so you want to be point blank and say, no, I have this. Something else I put out there, and if you do need the green card, well then obviously don't mention that. Because the idea is you want them to fall in love with you as a candidate so that you're considered such a value add and not necessarily a cost item once they interview you, that they're willing to do that because they want you as an employee. Something else I'm just throwing out there because it popped into my head, but also something you put in the professional summary, if you have a security clearance. This is particular for anybody who's in the military and making that transition to civilian. That's one of the top transferable skills that employers love to see, is your subject matter expertise, as well as whatever security clearances you have that are currently active. Getting back to Suzanne's statement though, if you're fresh out of school, you have something that's a bit more of an objective, or at least you can get around that because you may not have a ton to say. But I do always try and position the information so you're still talking about your recent degree, what internship experience you have, or what you've learned in your courses, and how that skill set applies to whatever role you're going after. Also, I think it's incredibly important if you're looking to change careers to use that professional summary, because that's your opportunity to set the stage for the rest of your resume and kind of explain to them why you're making this transition and why it's a good thing for them, because what you're able to bring to the table, given your experience or your background, your perspective, that's going to make you a really attractive employee. And again, that could be certain transferable skills, it could be industry knowledge, information on the target customer, whatever it is, you just got to find that piece and insert it in.
So we started a little late, so I'm going to go ahead and say that we have time for maybe 2 more questions.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so...
Sorry guys, that was me. It was not my team, I was the late one.
No worries. So Jan asks, what do you do when you feel like your ex-employees are giving you a bad reference?
That's awful, because you can't necessarily just call them and say stop doing it, right? What I would recommend is that if your company is, if an employer is looking to do a background check, you want to give them HR's number. Don't give them other people's. All they really are supposed to do is call to verify you worked there, you held a certain title, and you worked there for this date to that date. That's really all they're supposed to do. If you need more personal recommendations, I would make sure you've curated your own list. Who do you want to speak for you? So the first thing I do is identify who's somebody who was a peer, or maybe a vendor, somebody above me, somebody I manage. Look for a couple different variations. Always go to that person and ask them specifically, would they be willing to be a reference? And if so, what phone number and email address would they like you to use if you're going to use them? And then always make sure they have the most recent copy of your resume. And as soon as you interview for a job, if you think your references are going to be checked, you give that person a heads up and you give them a link to that job, and you can even give them some pointers on, I think they're specifically interested in this work that we did together or something like that. So anything you can prep them for, that's a much better circumstance. I'd also, if you're looking to try and combat any negative vibes you're getting from some of your former colleagues, I'd look for who can you get to put references and recommendations on your LinkedIn profile. That's the one thing I really love about the LinkedIn profile. You need both. You need the resume. 90-something%, I think it's 97% of employers still say they use the resume to evaluate someone's candidacy. So you still need that. But the LinkedIn profile gives this other fun layer of information in a more personal package that the resume doesn't necessarily do. And so what you can post, the media that you can add, but also this idea that people can, what's it called with the skills? You have top skills, they can endorse you. I think the endorsements are a little BS. I'm just gonna, between you all and me, I think they're a little BS. However, what I've learned is that when recruiters search using the recruiter access to LinkedIn, they can search by top skills, and so having those endorsements helps you. You can finagle that a bit more. But get people to actually put recommendations, written out recommendations that you can publish on your profile. If you don't know how to do that, it's very simple. Google how to request a recommendation on LinkedIn. You'll get the instructions. The only other thing I can do is if you're in a small market and you think they're bad-mouthing you, and it's not that they're necessarily a reference, but they're just spreading bad news, I think you just have to be aware of what's going on and have a story to tell. Not everybody is going to know everyone, and look for who are your allies who will advocate on your behalf, because again, that networking component is probably going to become extra important to help overshadow some of that negative stuff.
Last one.
Okay.
Sean writes that he's a sales executive and he's worked for a few startups for about a year apiece.
Okay.
How do you explain jobs that are around a year or less? He knows that can be a red flag for most recruiters.
Yeah, and especially in sales, I hate to say it, because whether it's fair or not, they expect you can sell anything, doesn't matter what happened. One thing I will say is, at least in the startup world, you get a little bit more, they get a little bit more lax, or, you get a little bit more latitude, because we know the startup world can be super unstable. So assuming most of these companies are still around and they're doing well, that's going to make things more challenging. But if you went into them and the companies, have kind of ceased to exist, or they never really got the full funding, or, they're kind of quiet and no one's really ever heard of them because it hasn't really taken off, I think you get a lot, they give you a get out of jail free card. The biggest thing I think to point out, or what you want to go after, is what can you say you accomplished there? And I know in a year that can be really challenging, but you really want to dig in and say whether it's a percentage or it's a certain dollar amount. What was your quota? Were you beating quota, meeting quota, by how much? If you built a team, how big was the team? That sort of thing. And if there is an explanation. So if it's because they decided to completely restructure the way they're doing sales, or they decided to move the location, if there's some specific reasons, you might want to add some of that color into the little paragraph under your name, under that job. The way I like to break up most job descriptions in your work history is there's a title, location, depending on the company name, I might put a one-liner underneath that company that explains what that company does, in case people aren't aware of it, or if I want to highlight certain aspects of that company that are very relevant to the companies I'm applying for now. But underneath that job title, I tend to have a small blurb that explains kind of my roles and responsibility, so stuff you can pull straight from job descriptions about what you were responsible for, and then use bullets to call attention to the most important information. And if you're only there for a year, 1 to 2 bullets might be it. Or 1 bullet might be it, but I'd call attention to whatever's the big thing you did. How big of a team did you grow? What did that team accomplish? Even if it's just getting them off the ground, that's a feat. But in that one small paragraph before you get to the bullets, if there's any type of color you can provide that kind of explains why it didn't pan out, that might be worth it. Also, depending on how it works, you can be creative and decide how much you want to put on that resume. Because if the way it worked out is that you started one company in 1 year and ended it in another, or two opportunities fall within the same year the whole time, you might be able to finagle what the dates look like, or just decide to remove one of those roles. Do we have time for one more, or are we out of time?
We're out of time.
Okay. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope this was helpful. What I'm going to do is, I think tomorrow, I'm going to look through if anybody has any other questions. If you go back to the event page on Facebook and you post your questions, I'll try and answer them between tomorrow and Monday. And then I'm also going to put together an article with this live chat and try and spell out the most important pieces that I went over and give over all those resources, because I do have a ton of resources we didn't even talk about. And we'll make sure, if you had RSVP'd and if you liked Top Resume's Facebook page, you'll be able to get a copy of that article. Thank you all for coming, and don't forget to apply or put your hat in the ring to win our VIP job search treatment and get your free resume critique at Top Resume. Thanks everyone, and have a great day.